The National Literacy and Numeracy Test, known as NAPLAN, will be held next week in New South Wales schools. The tests were introduced by the former Howard government, but they were elevated to a new level when the Rudd government decided to use the test results as a way of comparing and evaluating school performance. At the time, the then Education Minister Julia Gillard was heavily influenced by reforms taking place in the United States, in particular New York City. But now, under the direction of US President Barack Obama, America is moving away from its dependence on standardised national testing, calling it a policy failure. This week, one of President Obama's education advisors, Professor Linda Darling-Hammond from Stanford University, was in Sydney at the invitation of the Australian Education Union to deliver a sober warning. Lucy Carter reports.
I would advise people not to follow the model that we've set and now are moving away from.
So our challenge is very different than it was 100 years ago.
The message from the woman described as one of the world's leading education advisors couldn't have been clearer.
Australia is poised to build on some great successes that have been part of your tradition over the last decades. Or perhaps to take some turns that the United States has already trod and that we're trying to come back from.
Linda Darling-Hammond was in Australia this week to talk about education reform. But it was her message about what not to do, especially in relation to standardised testing, that Australian educators were most interested in.
I think the concern that is on the horizon in Australia is whether attaching all kinds of stakes to those tests, which are more like the tests we're moving away from in their design, the sort of the multiple choice approach, might cause the curriculum to be overly influenced in that direction and might reduce, in fact, the more creative, problem-solving, forward-looking education.
Well, I think there are not a lot of similarities between the US system and the Australian system. NAPLAN testing is only a part of what we do when we're teaching kids in this country. The American system has been quite test-focused generally. Australia's is much more balanced.
Next week across Australia, primary and secondary school children will sit the NAPLAN literacy and numeracy tests. The results of the tests will form the basis of the information on the My School website, a site the federal government claims parents love, but one the education sector has always had grave concerns about.
It is one little snapshot in time and it doesn't give a complete picture about what a child's capable of. And when you use that to score a school and a school community, I think that you are overstepping the real reason that we had the test.
With schools now being publicly judged on the My School website, teachers and principals are under pressure to keep their NAPLAN scores high. But at what cost?
Well, I think there's a concern that when students are spending all of their time focusing on multiple choice tests and bubbling in one answer out of 5, they're not learning to write effectively, they're not engaging in research and inquiry, they're not basically learning college and career-ready skills that would allow them to be successful when they get outside of school.
Lots of principals are saying they're very concerned about the impact of NAPLAN on teaching time and on, more importantly, on curriculum, and that the curriculum's going to become narrowed down further and further as we become more dependent on resourcing as a result of the NAPLAN tests.
I think it's really important that we recognise that literacy and numeracy are the bedrocks. If we get literacy and numeracy right for kids, then they can go on to have a successful career. They can get jobs. They can stand up for themselves in the world. If they don't have that literacy and numeracy, then the deeper learnings, the areas of interest that they might have academically, they'll never get to them in any concrete way.
Education was on the agenda for the Prime Minister this week, with some pre-budget announcements, including extra support for disadvantaged students and another US-inspired reform, bonus payments for high-performing teachers.
We will design a system where teachers who are performing well can get additional pay and additional reward to recognise that great performance.
But like national testing, bonus payments have not worked in the US.
We have had very poor results from the one-time bonus payment 4 teachers on an annual basis given out as quotas for a few teachers. And in fact, there have been 2 experiments that have been done on that recently. They've both found that that did not improve achievement, and in one case it actually reduced achievement for students.
Teaching is not a singular task. The best teachers teach in teams. They collaborate together, they plan, they assess, they ask each other questions about the students' work, and they look to each other for guidance and as a critical friend. To put them into a position where they are really pitting one teacher against another means that we're increasing competition. And who is going to want to be part of a collaborative team when ultimately it's about a competition and one person will get money and the others don't?
We will develop a best practice model, one that's a robust, one that identifies, for example, things like collaboration and cooperation, things like the way in which teachers get involved in extracurricular activities. It won't only be about how NAPLAN is going in a school. I mean, obviously, particularly with kids in the later years of school, there isn't NAPLAN testing. So this will be a much more comprehensive best practice tool. We'll learn from other people's experience and we'll listen carefully to what the sector says.
How many lines does an angle form?
Linda Darling-Hammond says the US is now rethinking its approach to standardised testing and teacher bonuses, especially in light of its poor education results in comparison to other OECD nations. She has this message for Australia.
And I would say, please be sure that your assessments are thoughtful, measure quality learning, and are used in the right ways to improve curriculum and improve teaching, rather than to rank and sort schools, students, and teachers, which at the end of the day, as the Singapore minister said recently in a meeting I was at the end of the day, that simply undermines the profession and the possibilities for school improvement.